for Mr. Kushner, or not any of these private business matters were discussed at the White House, were discussed alongside the other things that might have brought the Citigroup chairman and Joshua Harris into the White House to talk to Kushner.
No. But, look, one of the big problems that ethics experts will cite in the whole situation is we basically have to take their word for it, right? There are no publicly available logs documenting the existence of the meetings, much less what was discussed at the meetings. We know from our sources that the meetings happened, and we know separately that these financial transactions happened. But this is the sort of difficulty with the situation that's been created, right, is we essentially have to kind of take their word for it that things were discussed or weren't discussed, and we have no way of knowing about meetings because they don't make that information public anymore unless we discover it on our own. So, I mean, look, the short answer is no. We have no indication that they discussed the loans. But, it's also, I think, the issue ethics experts would raise is you have a potential issue even if he doesn't raise the loan, right? I mean, Jared Kushner is one of the most powerful people in the world right now. We know that he discussed a White House job with Joshua Harris, and that on its own raises concerns about the subsequent financial transactions between Kushner companies and Apollo. And, to be clear, I mean, there's a number of very, in some cases specific, in some cases potentially nebulous triggers to determine if there's actually a violation of the ethics regulations or of the law.
Or potentially a bribe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speculate about that, but I mean, here, what you have is a situation where, Jared Kushner potentially through his company seeking a loan from Apollo, potentially that creates a certain relationship between him and Mr. Harris, which in turn prohibits him from engaging in other sorts of decisions and conversations as a government official. We have no indication that he did that, but it certainly puts him into a kind of a zone of potential problems, right? I mean, he's kind of running into, okay, now he's got this relationship potentially with Harris through his company, and that prevents him from being able to have certain types of conversations about things Apollo might be seeking from the government. And we just don't know. We don't know what happened beyond those meetings. Right. And Apollo, to kind of put it in context also, right, Josh Harris was a frequent visitor to the White House as part of kind of an advisory council on infrastructure. And Apollo and other private equity firms are looking to create serious businesses on figuring out ways to make money from the infrastructure plan, right? So Apollo was seeking something from the Trump administration implicitly and is there providing input on what the infrastructure plan should be. Separately, Apollo had a lot at stake in the tax plan, and private equity executives in general ended up making out quite well. Donald Trump during the campaign had promised to make private equity managers pay taxes at a higher rate.
And then that didn't end up part of the tax plan.
Disappeared, right. So, I mean, Apollo has very significant interests at stake when it comes to the Trump administration.
While they are making a $184 million loan to Mr. Kushner's family real estate firm, part of it that he himself is still financially linked to.
Right.
Jesse Drucker, thank you very much for helping us understand this reporting. It's important reporting, and you've made it even clearer than it is in print. Thanks.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Up next here, the thing I was going to talk about before this happened, which is another jaw-dropping story we learned about actually just in the last few hours. It's been a big day, and it's going to be a big night. Stay with us.
Is trying to discern is whether in those conversations he was trying to fire Jeff Sessions or push Jeff Sessions out so he could exert more control over the investigation. As we've reported and others have countless times, the president is very upset that Jeff Sessions recused himself, wanted an attorney general who was more loyal, did not think he should have recused himself. And in these efforts, a special counsel wants to know, was he trying to fire Jeff Sessions so he could put someone in who would handle the investigation differently?
So essentially, Mueller's looking at it was this part of an attempt to obstruct justice, to get somebody who's more pliable, more an ally of the president in that position?
Right. I think that's an accurate distillation, Anderson. Our reporting indicates that, over many months, there are a number of instances, occasions of firing of Jim Comey being one, the statement on Air Force One that aides crafted that was misleading about a meeting at Trump Tower, where the special counsel wants to know, was there an effort to obstruct justice or obstruct this probe? As was reported last month, there was even an effort at one point that the president was thinking about firing Mueller. So there are a number of instances, including this attempt to oust Jeff Sessions or to shame Jeff Sessions in the summer, that fit into a broader narrative of, was there any obstruction here by the president or his people?
And of course, this story comes on a day when the president is continuing to publicly go after his attorney general in rather extraordinary ways. I mean, the period of time that Mueller's looking at, according to your reporting, there was a remarkable amount of public vitriol coming from the president and aimed at Sessions.
Right. There were several days of relentless tweets, relentless public comments. Trump's aides were in the media anonymously asking for Jeff Sessions to essentially quit. One of the things we reported tonight in our story, Anderson, is that the pressure has been so hot on Jeff Sessions and the criticism so sharp that his aides actually last month pitched in and bought him a bulletproof vest and put his name on it because of the first year he's had with President Trump, and jokingly suggested that he should wear it to work.
You're also learning about the kinds of things that the president says to others about the attorney general.
Right. Right, he's very derisive about Attorney General Sessions. One of the comments he likes to make is referring to him as Mr. Magoo, the 1950s era comic character that was short-sighted and bumbling and was not seen as particularly intelligent. He likes to refer to him as a Mr. Magoo, and that's caught several advisors of his by surprise, to have conversations with him where he's referring to his Attorney General as Mr. Magoo. I don't think President Trump thinks Jeff Sessions is very sweet, Anderson.
I guess he doesn't like Mr. Magoo either. Josh Dawsey, thanks very much. Fascinating reporting. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, when it comes to political investigative reporting, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, of course, set the standard. Their work for the Washington Post during the Watergate scandal in the 1970s played a huge role in the downfall of President Nixon. Their reporting won the Pulitzer Prize for public service, and their landmark book, All the President's Men, became an equally landmark movie. Today, Bob and Carl are both acclaimed authors. Bob is also an associate editor of the Washington Post, and Carl is a CNN political analyst. On this night of a great deal of breaking news, I'm very happy to have both of them with me here in Washington. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. First of all, just what do you make of the Washington Post report that the special counsel is now looking at President, or asking questions at least, about President Trump's beratement of his own attorney general last summer?
Well, it would be logical that they would, and if you talk to people who go and they're interviewed by Mueller's people, lots of FBI agents, sometimes the interviews run 10, 12 hours, so they're going to ask every question. I don't think you can draw a conclusion from it.
From what questions? Some of it is just checking off. I mean, it would be remiss if they didn't ask.
Yes, and somebody may, because, they're in a position where they have to tell the truth, that they're going to be, careful, or they may be forthcoming with some lead. So I think it's part of the puzzle and the matrix we're seeing in all of this.
Again, on a day, normally that would probably be the lead story. On this day, though, we've also had, obviously, this meeting on gun control, Hope Hicks stepping down. When you both look at this White House, just in terms of the way it's organized, the way it is run, have you ever seen a White House like this?
No. And I think what's going on now, there are two stories that are coming together. There's the Mueller investigation. There's the Russian story and the possibility of collusion and the possibility of obstruction of justice. But there is now a subtext that people in the White House will say to you, it is unclear to them whether Donald Trump can effectively govern, whether he's capable of it in terms of his own abilities, conduct, and whether or not things have gotten to the point where the wheels are coming off of this presidency. We don't know that, but certainly people in the White House are openly with each other and with journalists raising those kinds of questions.
It's not clear who has authority or what authority, and
it's been that way from the beginning.
Yeah, indeed, but as people disappear, like Hope Hicks was one of the sidekicks, and I remember talking to her about what job she was going to take after the election, and she said, I just don't want to be involved in the hand-to-hand combat of the daily coverage. And she did step back from that, and now, you know, off she goes. So lots of people are going or have gone or may go.
I've just been rereading the final days of an amazing book you guys wrote about the last year of the Nixon administration. And obviously, we've been very careful about comparisons to Watergate, obviously, as both of you have. But just in terms of, did President Nixon have anybody who was as close to him as Hope Hicks, as Jared Kushner, as Ivanka Trump? I mean, in that sort of inner circle.
Well, I think one of the realities of all presidents is they have the disease of isolation, that there is not that kind of where people come in and actually tell the full story. And so presidents become protected and disconnected, and I think that's happening in
One
this
of the
way.
other things that is similar, there are many similarities with Watergate, and there are also a truckload of things that are very different. But one of the similarities are people around the President of the United States who try to restrain the worst instincts of the president, in both Nixon's case and in Trump's case, although it's more egregious, I think, even in Trump's case. But we now have, in the White House, Kelly, over at the Defense Department, Mattis, we have a group of people around the President of the United States whose almost primary function is to keep him in line, to keep him from doing things that might be dangerous in their eyes. It's an extraordinary, and you go to the final days where in the last year of the Nixon presidency, there were concerns along those lines. But it's awful early in the game in a new administration for this to be happening now.
One forgets, General, I mean, he had a chief of staff who was a general who was relatively new.
General Haig.
General Haig,
Nixon, yes.
Relatively new in the administration. Was Haig's role similar to the role that Kelly's been playing?
Well, we're seeing. I remember the month after Nixon resigned, Carl and I went to Haig's house, and the old knocking on the door at night.
You just showed up.
We just showed up. His son let us in.
His son let us in, and then Haig came back from the British embassy in his tuxedo.
I'm sure he was thrilled that his son
he was a happy guy.
His son lost 4 weeks of allowance or something. But then Haig told us, it was an astonishing interview. He said he was so worried about Nixon, that Nixon might take his life, that he took away Nixon's pills, that at one point Nixon said, in your business, Al, meaning the Army, they leave a revolver in the drawer. Wow. And so it got to, now, I don't think we would suggest at all in any way that
totally
it's getting
different.
to that point. But the emotional distress and toll that a president under investigation, where there are continuous stories, I think by and large the stories are really well done, but how do you think Trump looks at this? It's piling on. It's unfair.
It's a witch hunt.
How come they're doing this? It's a witch hunt by Mueller. It's a witch hunt by the press. And so we've got to be careful about being as accurate and adopting a tone that's repertorial rather than adversarial.
Accusatorial. But it's interesting, though, you're talking about the emotional toll it takes on a president and the isolation. In some ways, and let me ask, comparing the stress that Nixon was under and the complexity of the Watergate investigation with this investigation, which actually potentially involves his children, his closest friends, his finances, his past business dealings, is this almost more complex for this president and perhaps even closer to home?
Well, they're both very emotional events for each president of the United States, and one reacts one way and the other. Nixon reacted. He was presiding over a criminal cover-up.
Right, but Trish Nixon wasn't being hauled in front of.
But that's what most of his efforts, I think, went into. Whereas Trump, we see Trump's reactions every day. And yes, he is under siege, and he thinks and feels and believes he is unfairly under siege.
Do you wish that Nixon had Twitter back then? Because in terms of a real-time Rorschach test of what is happening in the president's mind, I mean, the Twitter allows it.
If that's really a full picture of what's going on in Trump's mind, I don't think it is. Thank God Nixon didn't have Twitter.
But he had the tapes.
Yeah, he had the tapes, which he thought would always be secret. Right. And then there are thousands of hours. And if you listen to these things, and Carl and I do this, somewhat obsessively for the historical lesson in it, it's appalling. What
News can't be surpassed. Big Sky, the gym's voted best in Greater Hartford. Check it out at BigSkyFitness.com.
Better gyms, better workouts, better results. Big Sky, Big Sky, Big Sky, Big Sky.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
We're joined again by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the Washington Post reporters who broke the Watergate story wide open back in the 70s. I just want to play a clip from the movie made from your guys' book, All the President's Men. You've probably seen this. I've watched it probably several hundred times. It became a catchphrase for investigators worldwide. Take a look.
You tell me what you know, and I'll confirm. I'll keep you in the right direction if I can, but that's all. Just follow the money.
Hal Holbrook, I think, playing the character. This is
Deep Throat, who was Mark Felt,
right, who was
number
Mark,
2.
Right, from the FBI. Do you, I mean, this is kind of a dumb question, but do you miss the days when you were talking to sources in dark garages? Or maybe you still do,
He still does.
Do you guys still do that?
We both do. Of course.
I go out and move a flower pot in our backyard.
Right, and the gardener shows up.
But in All the President's Men, you write extensively about, I don't want to use the actual term, it was rat effing, which was a term that the Nixon team had for basically messing around with election campaigns. It is amazing when you think about that compared to the Russia's efforts, I mean, which is rat effing on a major scale.
Both of these events, Watergate was about Richard Nixon's attempt to undermine the electoral system of the United States, the most basic element of American democracy,
and
to underwrite the right to vote. Because what the object of all that political espionage and sabotage was Nixon wanted to run against George McGovern, the weakest candidate the Democrats could put up. He did not want to run against the strongest candidate, Edmund Muskie. And he and his aides set out to devise this vast campaign of political espionage and sabotage to undercut and destroy the Muskie campaign, and they succeeded. And, of course, the allegations of, quote, collusion, right, and what the Russians tried to do was to determine the outcome of an American election, to affect an American election. So in both cases, and Bob, ironically enough, you're dealing with the same allegation in some way.
Well, Nixon succeeded, as Carl pointed out, but we don't know the impact of the Russian meddling, and that's a big issue, and maybe we'll never know. Right. And we don't know. I mean, there's so much noise out there, and there's so much, they determined the election. No, they didn't. Oh, half these ads that are being questioned actually ran after the election and so could not affect the election. So it's a lot of work, and I think one of the points we agree on is that there's a lot of work that Mueller and the House and the Senate investigations need to do, but so does the media, and not just a reaction to the daily event, but doing the 4-hour interviews, going and knocking on the door at night, meeting people, and really establishing a relationship of trust so you can find out what they really know.
One other aspect
on the phone.
One other aspect, though, of this story that's very different, and that is whatever the Russians did, and we might never find out what the effect was in terms of the election itself, they have destabilized us and continue to by this whole investigation and the fact that we are in this paroxysm of trying to deal with what they have done and the president's reaction to it, that the destabilization that has taken place through Russia's efforts is extraordinary.
Did Watergate, I've talked to people who were in the Clinton White House who said that President Clinton was able to compartmentalize the investigations that were going on into him and governing. I guess it's an arguable point. Was Nixon able to do that? Because that's the criticism that's been made against President Trump is that essentially there's been reporting, I think it was from the Washington Post and New York Times, that briefers are loath to bring up Russia to him because he takes it personally as a delegitimizing, an attempt to delegitimize his election.
Well, your point, it takes a toll, and you can't kind of, particularly when you've got emotional people like Nixon was, like Trump is, and the idea that you can kind of shut it down and then say, oh yeah, now let's talk about the budget, let's do this. I mean, some of that's going on. You really wonder, and it's something that everyone needs to think about. What is the governing impact? Are we being governed? I mean, all this discussion, oh, we'll do this legislation, oh, we can't do that, we can't, I mean, maybe they're going to do none.
Right. Well, I would also want to put up a headline, one of your headlines from July 1973, Nixon sees witch hunt insiders say, which is just, I mean, it's the exact term.
How did you find that?
We're, hardworking producers.
Thank you.
But I mean, well, it's clearly that pushback was not effective for Nixon, but
he also tried to make the conduct of the press the issue in Watergate at the beginning, but not to the extent.
In fact, I also want to play a clip of Nixon talking to his press secretary Ron Ziegler on the phone. This is from December of '72. Let's just quickly play that. It's about the press.
I want it clearly understood that from now on, ever, no reporter from the Washington Post is ever to be in the White House. Is that clear? Absolutely. Unless it's a press conference. Yes, sir. Now, briefings here, but on a briefing. But never in the White House. No church service. Nothing that Mrs. Nixon does. You tell Connie, don't tell Mrs. Nixon because she'll approve it. No reporter from the Washington Post is ever to be in the White House again, and no photographer either. Mm-hmm. No photographer. Is that clear? Yes, sir. None ever to be in. Now that is a total order, and if necessary, I'll fire you. You understand? I do understand. Okay.
It's about the wedding.
Yes, but it's also about a mindset,
right?
And that is, this shows again that Nixon didn't understand the press. The answers to Watergate questions weren't in the White House. You're not going to walk in and talk to those people. You have to go see them at night, and you have to develop a method and a technique of just saying, we're not going to stop. But we had editors and owners at the Post who said, don't stop.
So much of the language, though, used by that Weiss, Ron Ziegler in October of '72 said of your reporting, quote, I personally feel that this is shabby journalism by the Washington Post, based totally on hearsay and innuendo, a blatant effort at character assassination. We hear this now time and time again about unnamed sources from this administration attacking.
Well, Richard Nixon always had an adversarial relationship with the press, going back to when he was a congressman, going back to when he was senator and vice president. What you have with Trump, though, Trump's career was built on manipulating the press, on having a great relationship with the New York Post and the New York Daily News. And even to the point where we know that Donald Trump, impersonating someone who called himself John Barron, would call in gossip stories about the beautiful blondes that he was going out with to Studio 54. He has been accustomed to having a fawning press, and now he has come to Washington. He has gotten caught up in his own conduct, which is there for all to see. Question of whether it's criminal or not, we'll find out. But the question about his stability that Republicans in Congress have asked, it's all out there, and he cannot believe that the press...
Congressional reporter Manu.
New York.
Why? And thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget, you can watch Out Front anytime, anywhere. You just have to go to CNN Go. AC 360 begins right now.
Good evening from Washington. What a day. A lot of breaking news tonight, and that's on top of even more big developments all day long. In just the last hour or so, new reporting on the president and his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, who he publicly shamed yet again today. According to the Washington Post, Russia's special counsel Mueller is focusing on the first time the president did that, if you remember, back last summer, and whether it was or is part of an attempt to obstruct justice. Also, the sudden departure of White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, and late word on a presidential berating she got in the run-up to it. A source telling CNN that he's furious. Hicks told the House Intelligence Committee that she's lied on his behalf. White lies, she's called them, whatever that is. In addition, tonight, an exclusive conversation with Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein about what they are seeing in this White House and the inevitable comparisons with Watergate and the Nixon administration. They don't talk about it often. Tonight, they will in depth. We begin, though, with CNN's Jim Acosta at the White House. Jim, I understand you have some new reporting about Hope Hicks and Mueller's investigation as well.
That's right, Anderson. A former Trump campaign official told me earlier today that during this ex-aides sessions with Robert Mueller's team over at the special counsel's office, that comments made previously by Hope Hicks, the White House communications director, who is now the outgoing communications director, came up during these meetings with Mueller's team, as well as with investigators in the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Now, Anderson, this former Trump campaign official says what is at issue here is what Hicks told the New York Times in November of 2016. That was just 2 days after the election, when Hope Hicks was asked by the New York Times about Trump campaign contacts with the Russians. In the New York Times, Hope Hicks is quoted as saying, "We are not aware of any campaign representatives that were in touch with any foreign entities." Before yesterday, when Mr. Trump spoke with many world leaders, those discussions were congratulatory and forward-looking, according to this former Trump campaign official who has spoken with Mueller's team, Anderson. The investigators with the special counsel's office have asked whether or not Hicks's comment was accurate and whether she, in fact, knew whether there were Trump campaign contacts with the Russians, given the fact that we've seen many of those contacts have come to light in recent months. Now, we should point out, this is obviously just one part of the investigation. And according to this former Trump campaign official, not only is Robert Mueller's team interested in all of this, but so is the House and Senate Intelligence Committees.
So do we know why she resigned, or if she resigned? Was she fired? I mean, if the president was berating her, obviously she said the things about telling white lies yesterday on Capitol Hill. What do we know about what actually happened?
Well, according to a White House official I spoke with earlier today, there was nothing nefarious, quote unquote, about Hicks's departure, there was some movement towards this in recent weeks. According to this White House official, this had nothing to do with Rob Porter. This had nothing to do with the comments that she made yesterday to the House Intelligence Committee when she said that from time to time she has to tell little white lies on behalf of the president. What this official did not say to me was that this did not have anything to do with the Mueller investigation. Obviously, we'll have to see if that comes to light later on. But according to this White House official, this is something that has been building up for some time. It's something that she wanted to do. And as you saw, the White House put out glowing statements from the president and the chief of staff praising Hope Hicks. And the president, in fact, in his statement, Anderson, left the door open to working with Hope Hicks in the future. Keep in mind, the president just announced his new campaign manager this week for the 2020 election. He may have a communications director in mind for that campaign.
It does seem weird, though, that today of all days, suddenly, it's the decision to announce that she's going to go pursue other opportunities. I mean, the president had this big bipartisan meeting on guns, which I assume the White House would want to have a lot of focus on. And then it was just shortly after that meeting that the Hope Hicks news broke and basically has sort of dwarfed that meeting.
I think it just goes to show the White House needs a new communications director, Anderson. If you were the communications director, you would not schedule things in this fashion. Obviously, you don't want the sudden departure of a key White House official, and nobody was closer to President Trump than Hope Hicks, and that includes the president's own family. She was frequently, and she probably still is and will be over the coming weeks, frequently in the residence here at the White House with the president, early in the morning, late at night, dealing with him on all sorts of issues, in particular dealing with the news media. We know that all too well, dealing with Hope behind the scenes. But Anderson, obviously, this stepped all over the president's message today on gun control. Here, we thought the most remarkable thing that happened today would be that gun control meeting over here at the White House, when in fact it was the departure of his communications director.
Yeah, or take your pick, or going after his attorney general yet again.
Or any of those things. Yes,
right,
exactly.
Yeah. Jim Acosta, thanks for reporting with me here. Jen Psaki, David Chalian, and Gloria Borger. I mean, Gloria, it is hard to overstate the importance of Hope Hicks. I mean, people at home maybe they've seen pictures of her, but I mean, during the campaign, I remember doing interviews with then candidate Trump, and it seemed like the whole campaign for a while was just Trump, Corey Lewandowski, and Hope Hicks.
Totally. She's always been around. She's the Trump whisperer. She's completely 100% loyal. She's young. And she is, as one source said to me, is very close to Trump. He said she is his emotional support. Period. That's what he has. And he predicted to me with some trepidation that without her there, the president would go into what he called a tailspin.
Well, because it's not only now that she's gone, his, former, body man, security guard who's been with him forever and ever, Keith Schilling, he's also left.
He's also gone. So when you look at the people he was close to originally, you had, Corey Lewandowski, he was close to Hope Hicks, Keith Schiller, and he's got problems with Jared now, which means he probably has problems with Ivanka, and Melania hasn't been happy with him because of the Stormy Daniels story. So this is a president who is more and more isolated, sort of on the personal side, really. General Kelly is cutting off his phone conversations with all of his old friends. So he's kind of alone.
David, I mean, a source told CNN, a source close to the White House told CNN that the president berated Hope Hicks about the statement that she had made yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, we know that this president responds to the headlines and the news coverage that he consumes, and it was a terrible day of news coverage for Hope Hicks between her testimony last night and everywhere this morning was like Hope Hicks, White House communications director who speaks on behalf of the president of the United States, white lies. It was just everywhere. So it does not surprise me that he would have some concern about how bad the news coverage was over that. I'm sure that's not the reason, as our reporting indicates. The Rob Porter situation was obviously not easy for Hope Hicks to go through as she was in a relationship with him. This has been building, but you were talking about the emotional crutch that she is for the president. She is so all-staffer in any White House that I know of. Jen could correct me if I'm wrong. Would spend as much time in the Oval Office with the president at the president's side as Hope Hicks did. She also was so emotionally invested in this, which is why I think we hear of this being a rather sort of emotional, tearful goodbye that she was giving today, because she is a pure loyalist to the president.
Jen, I mean, you were the White House communications director. You know the job. What do you make of this departure?
Well, one, I think,
role?
There's no question Hope, by all accounts, played a very important role in this White House, but it wasn't as the communications director. She really was the tamer of the savage beast that is Donald Trump. That's a very important role because she protected many people on the staff from his whims and his mood swings. But the communications director and the role of the communications director is not to print off cable coverage or print off tweets. That's not entirely her fault. In large part, I think it's because Donald Trump is the communications director, and he's not going to allow somebody to serve in that role. So her departure is significant because, as we've all touched on this panel, it leaves a major emotional gap in the White House for Trump, but also, I think, for a lot of the staff. And when people like that leave, you can start to see things come apart at the seams.
You always need somebody with a president who you can go to and say, what's his mood today? What's he feeling like? I mean,
we need to get this done.
We need to get this done. A lot of people know because they read his tweets in the morning before they get in, and they know his mood. But you need somebody who kind of gets it. And she's that person.
So we got to ask, again, the president publicly shaming his own attorney general. I mean, this is so, bizarre. I mean, it's happened before, but it seems like now it's happening again. I mean, it's got to be embarrassing for Jeff Sessions. It's got to be humiliating for Jeff Sessions, yet he continues to hang in.
He does hang in, and he issued this statement today that he was defending the Constitution, but I think he has become sort of the Kate McKinnon version on SNL of him. I mean, it is, I cannot think of a cabinet member or a senior member of administration to have to suffer this kind of public humiliation for an entire year now, Anderson. This is his handpicked attorney general. Jeff Sessions was one of the first statewide elected officials who was on board with Trump in the primaries and really went out there for him, campaigned all across the country. So it, again, I think is a lesson about the one-way street of loyalty.
But it also comes on a day now the Washington Post has been reporting, and we're going to talk to one of the reporters on that story, that Mueller is actually looking into the past comments, the public shaming that President Trump did of his attorney general, to see if it's part of an obstruction of justice to basically get rid of him and put in somebody more compliant to oversee the Russia investigation.
Which you have to imagine there's sort of an emotional switching going on in Donald Trump's head. Do I keep him? I sort of control him. I've made him the incredible shrinking Jeff Sessions. Do I try to get somebody else? If you're Jeff Sessions, you're at the end of your career, and you are thinking, I want to leave on my terms, which is probably what is going on with Rex Tillerson, what's going on with Jared Kushner, a number of people in that White House. But what he has allowed Trump to do is to minimize him and make him look like
But he's also, I mean, of all the people that the president has around him, in terms of somebody who's actually executing conservative agenda. He's actually doing it. He's putting in, it doesn't get a lot of news coverage, but I mean, he's actually doing it.
But even when he does it, sort of saying we're going to crack down on leaks, people are reporting as if, oh, he's just trying to get in with the president again. He's trying to get on his good side. When in fact, Jeff Sessions is a real conservative. But I'll tell you what, today, Jeff Sessions did, for the first time, come out punching a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure it's going to do him that much good, but he did defend the Department of Justice. He did release a statement saying we're doing the right thing by sending this to the, to the Inspector General. The Inspector General can clearly refer things for criminal prosecution, and he publicly said something, which he hasn't done in the past. So maybe he's making progress.
All right, as I said, we're going to talk to the Washington Post reporter, one of them who broke this story, coming up. Our breaking coverage continues. Yet more now on something Gloria Borger mentioned a moment ago, an apparent show of solidarity between Attorney General Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. This is video of them leaving the Department of Justice together. Axios is reporting they dined together again as a show of solidarity. That's on top of all the rest. Hope Hicks, joining a long list of former people who've done the job or been named to it, is just the latest chapter in a story we've never seen in Washington before. She's never held a job like this before, never worked at the White House before, never worked in Washington, never been questioned by a special counsel nor a congressional committee. She's at the center of a scandal over security clearances that led to the departure of a top White House staffer whom she was dating at the time. All in all, Hope Hicks, her story is quite a story, and it's not over yet. More now from Randy Kay.
I'm 28 years old, and I am the press secretary for the Donald J. Trump for President campaign.
It was a swift rise for Hope Hicks, who went from modeling and acting early on to handling PR for Ivanka Trump's fashion line after college. By 2014, Hicks was managing communications for the Trump Organization, and soon her job would change again.
She used to be in my real estate company. I said, "What do you know about politics?" She said, "Absolutely nothing." I say, "Congratulations, you're into the world of politics," right?
Hicks told New York Magazine, Mr. Trump looked at me and said, "I'm thinking about running for president, and you're going to be my press secretary." During the campaign, Hicks reportedly had a note from candidate Trump above her desk that read simply, "Hopi, you're the greatest."
Hope, get up here. She's always on the phone talking to the reporters, trying to get the reporters to straighten out their dishonest stories.
Hicks had zero political experience, yet she was almost always by Donald Trump's side. Through it all, her voice rarely heard in public. She didn't even release a statement after a very public screaming match with former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. And at this campaign event in Alabama, she seemed hesitant even to just say a few words.
Hi! Merry Christmas, everyone! And thank you, Donald Trump!
With her position in the White House, Hicks gained access to the world stage, taking part in this intimate gathering with the Pope, and also the Japanese Prime Minister's state banquet, where Hicks stole the spotlight in her black tuxedo. Her access to the president put her at the center of several key investigations, too. On Russia, she's been interviewed by Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's team multiple times. Just yesterday, she was in front of the House Intelligence Committee answering questions for about 8 hours, admitting that sometimes she was required to tell white lies in the Trump administration, but insisting she never lied about substantive matters.
So much stuff goes through her as the conduit between outsiders and the president that she really sits in a particularly important seat for Mueller.
And Hicks was also involved in the aftermath of Don Jr.'s meeting with the Russian lawyer at Trump Tower last year. On board Air Force One, helping craft the now infamous press release, claiming the meeting was about adoption. We've since learned it was really about dirt on Hillary Clinton. Hope Hicks also helped craft the initial White House response to allegations of domestic abuse by now former top aide Rob Porter, with whom she was romantically involved. Porter denied the allegations and resigned. Now the woman who rarely says a word in public will be taking her silence with her as she departs the White House. Randy Kay, CNN, New York.
More now on her departure, which follows her testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. Joining us now, a Democratic member of that committee, Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas. Thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
CNN is reporting tonight that Hope Hicks said that the kind of white lies that she was talking about were things like telling people that Trump was in a meeting when he wasn't, or spinning news favorably for her boss. Can you say anything more about what she meant by white lies?
No, and the indication was that it was basically small stuff, that it wasn't substantive stuff. And actually, because I heard Congressman Rooney about 30 minutes ago describe the question was actually, has the president ever asked you to lie? It was not whether you've ever lied for the president. What we were trying to get at is the president's actions and behavior in that question.
I mean, her resignation does come a day after testifying before the committee that you're on. Do you think the two are in any way related?
Quite possibly. Also with the reporting that the president may have berated her for being honest, really. But, you know, I told a few people yesterday, because they asked me, what was your impression of her? And there was a point there where, when she was going through that series of questions, that her face almost looked as if she was saying, you know, why did I ever get involved with these people, with Donald Trump?
That was the sense.
That was my sense when I was looking at her as she was struggling to answer these questions. You know, why did I ever get involved with this? And remember, she was not involved in politics before the president asked her to become part of a very consequential, the biggest campaign you can join, a presidential campaign.
And as the president said she knew nothing about politics before he decided to make her the press secretary, and now obviously the communications director. I mean, do you believe that the committee should subpoena her? I mean, because she basically did not answer, as many people have before this committee. She refused to answer questions, basically citing executive privilege, as I understand.
Yeah, she did cite executive privilege, but it went beyond that. Even when there was a question where it was clear that the answer would not be covered by executive privilege, I saw something yesterday that I hadn't seen before, which is for her lawyer to say, we'll take that under advisement, or we're just not going to answer that question. And that was the first time that somebody came in, an attorney, and was that arrogant about flouting the jurisdiction of the committee.
The only way to actually subpoena her is if the Republicans on the committee agree to it, and that seems unlikely. I mean, they don't seem to show any willingness.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me what I think we should do. I think if we're doing a fair job and a thorough job, we ought to subpoena her. If she comes in on subpoena and doesn't answer those questions still, then you would hold her in contempt. Then, at that point, you go in front of a court and a judge decides what happens.
Because, I mean, in a White House where I mean, I don't think the departure of a communications, director like this, or somebody, a close assistant to the president, would be such a big story if this White House wasn't organized in the disorganized way that it is, where there aren't necessarily clear lanes, or, I mean, at least initially there weren't. It's certainly cleaned up.
And she admitted as much. You know, she mentioned that when you work for Donald Trump, you work for Donald Trump, that he has the final say above the campaign manager, above the chief of staff, above everybody else.
Fascinating. Congressman Castro, thank you.
Oh, Bella, I really love playing with you.
Thanks, Grandma. I really like our visits.
Whatever tech tomorrow dreams up, you'll be ready with GigaBlast. Future speed internet is here from Cox.
Hope, the most powerful man in history.
Well, it's another one of those nights. More breaking news. The Washington Post reporting that special counsel Robert Mueller is taking a look at the time last summer when President Trump seemed determined to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions, publicly humiliating him as he did today. Did that amount, though, to a potential obstruction of justice? I'm spoken to a Washington Post reporter, Josh Dawsey, right before he went on air. Josh, what can you tell us about Mueller's interest regarding Attorney General Sessions and President Trump?
Right, so Special Counsel Mueller has shown intense interest in a period this summer in late July where President Trump was publicly shaming Jeff Sessions, saying that he was disappointing him. He was calling him beleaguered on Twitter. And behind the scenes, he was frequently fuming about the Russia investigation and the Attorney General. What Special Counsel Mueller's investigation is trying to discern is whether in those conversations he was trying to